Let me begin by invoking the blessings of Sri Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Lord, please bless us, all of us here in this particular webinar, that we learn from you. We are mere mediums in what we were doing right now. Thank you. First of all, many thanks to so many people who have been repeatedly coming to these sessions, and I thank the Hindu Economic Forum, the HEF, for organizing this particular session. We've been through 3 very interesting days where we talked about different aspects of philosophy and the Gita, and today we are going to start from today onwards. Today, tomorrow, and day after tomorrow, we're actually going to move into a more practical aspect of the Gita and how we can actually start making the Gita a part of our everyday life. So as I mentioned in the very first session, that I was fortunate enough to be initiated into the Gita by my father at a very young age. And the Gita has been a very interesting lodestone for me in my life whenever I've been confronted with any challenges. So today we are going to be talking about the 4 types of action and how can we break away from the Maya jaal of being in the comfort zone. So we're going to look at all these concepts in a more detailed way. So yesterday we dwelled into the 3 gunas, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas, and we saw how the interplay of these gunas. We talked about these 3 gunas like as if each of those gunas is a strand, is a very colorful, different kind of a strand, and how each of these gunas comes into play and how they bind us into action. And obviously each of them then will influence the way we take the kind of action that we want to take. We talked extensively yesterday about how each one of us is responsible for taking accountability for the future. So we'll move one step forward. One is to take accountability, which is a mental thing, but then we need to also act about it. It's not just taking accountability and being accountable for what you want to do in life, but you also need to bring in some amount of action, and you need to convert that thought process into an action so that you get the kind of results that you want to get. So as we dwell into the nature of action, I'm reminded of the many great people who have influenced my own thought process, and one of whom has been Swami Chinmayananda. I've been very fortunate that at a very young age, I managed to, my father actually forced me to go to a session of Swami Chinmayananda, and ever since, some of the teachings that Swamiji has shared with us, which are timeless teachings, are teachings that have continued to influence all of us. So Swami Chinmayananda talks about this as the art of action. And therefore, if you look at it, this is something which is very nice. The art of action. He doesn't talk about it as the science of action, but the art of action. And when you look at it, there is this very interesting distinction between art and science, of action. The art of action is more to do with the way you think. The science of action is more to do with what you do in life. And Swamiji says that there are 3 kinds of people who work, who take action. For want of a better word, and this is his own confession, he says, for want of a better word, I will call the first person a laborer, the second person a worker, and the third person a man of achievement. So he says there are 3 kinds of people who take action in life: a laborer, a worker, and a man of achievement. Let's not go with today's definition of who's a laborer and who's a worker and who's a man of achievement. Let's just understand what Swamiji is trying to get at, because we can then understand where we are at this point of time. Are we working like a laborer? So Swamiji says that a laborer is someone who only works for his wages. So there are a lot of us who are only working with a profit motive in life. Yesterday we said Krishna talks about the 4 types of people who are devotees of his. One who's in distress, somebody who wants wealth, somebody who wants knowledge, and somebody who's truly wise. Just to continue with that point and make a finer point, there are 3 types of people who take action. One is a laborer. So a lot of us, and this is a group that must be almost something like 70 to 80% of the world, where all of us are working only with a simple motive, that is, we want to make a profit, we want to earn some money, we want to survive, we want to be there, and that's the motive that we have in our entire life, that we will only work so that we decide what we want to get out of it. So Swamiji calls this group a group of workers. Then he says there is a group which is a little different from them, which is a group that he calls a laborer. The first is a laborer, the second he calls is a worker. And who is it that he says is a worker? A worker is someone who's working for success. A worker, he says, is someone who's making a huge change, even if it means there is a tremendous amount of sacrifice that the person has to make in his life. So he says this is a person who's slightly idealistic. That is what he says is a worker. A worker is risen above mere profit, but he wants to make a change for society. He wants to do something by which society will change. And then he says that there is a third type of people, which is a very small percentage of people, and he calls them men of achievement. Now, who is a men of achievement? These are people who are working for uplifting an entire generation. These are people who are trying to figure out a way by which an entire generation of us can change. These are people who are the philosophers. These are people who are the saints. So these three types of us take action. One who's a laborer, working only for profit. The second is a worker, someone who's actually working, who's trying to make a change, who's trying to work for success, who's saying that, look, let me make a sacrifice, but let me try and see what I can do to make a change in the world. And the third is a man of achievement, who's saying, I want to uplift an entire generation. I'm doing the right thing. So it is very important for us today to figure out which is the group that we are in. Are we in the group that is working like a laborer? Are we in a group that is working like a worker? Or are we in a group that is working like a man of achievement? These are three very interesting distinctions. Now, the point really that I'd like to make here is, maybe initially we start off by working as a laborer with that kind of a mentality, because we need to survive, we need to make money for our families, we need to provide for our families, we need to provide for our creature comforts. So we start working like that. But then a little later, can we get into a mentality of becoming a worker, saying that, look, can I contribute? Can I make a change to society? Can I do something by which I can contribute to people? Is that something which I can do? And finally, is it possible at some point of time to start thinking in terms of, can I do something by which I can uplift an entire group of people? Forget a generation, but at least can I uplift my entire family, my surroundings, the people that I deal with? Is there something that I can do with all of these people and make a change to them? So very interesting point here. So whether you're a laborer or a worker or a man of achievement, what happens is that you have to take action. And therefore, the motivation, the thought that drives, whether you're a worker or a laborer or a man of achievement, is a certain thought process. So we've got to understand that these actions that you take, in whatever mode that you are in, emanates from our thought processes. And our thoughts, as we saw in the first session, emanates from the conditioning that each of us has gone through in life. The inputs that we've got. It is this conditioning in our life that encapsulates the kind of character and ideals that we possess and that we display, that we actually are part of. So our character and ideals are what influence our thoughts, and it is these thoughts that drives actions. Yesterday we did a lot of thinking on the thought process and how we can actually figure out how we can move into the thought process. As I said, today we'll look at more in terms of an action. So it is but natural, right, that positive thoughts will mean positive actions. Okay, positive thoughts obviously emanate from positive ideals, and positive ideals, when they give rise to positive thoughts, will give rise to positive actions. And the corollary is also true, that if you have a negative ideal, then you will get negative thoughts, and therefore you will get into negative action, right? So it's entirely the kind of thought process that you will possess. So once we've understood that we have the power within us to create an enormous amount of positive thoughts and get those positive thoughts to translate into action, then our whole life becomes so much more simple. So at any point of time, start thinking in terms of the kind of positive thoughts that we can cultivate. And it is these positive thoughts that we can then take and see how they can get into reality. Now, this is easier said than done. Okay? Despite the best of our efforts, to constantly keep thinking positive thoughts, sometimes we find that it doesn't work. Okay? So, very often, one of my favorite examples that I like to quote is that with all good intentions, with all good planning, with all good positive thoughts, we start from a point A with all intention of going to point B. For whatever reason, instead of reaching point B, we end up in point C. And this happens more often than not to most people. That we begin the day by saying that this is something that I want to achieve. I want to achieve 1, I want to achieve 2, I want to achieve 3. But at the end of the day, you may actually not achieve 1, but you may achieve some part of 2. You may not achieve 3. You may achieve something like 4. This is a problem that we all have, isn't it? So why is it that despite the best of thoughts, despite the best of intentions in our life, instead of getting to point B, which is a desirable point B, we actually end up in getting to point C, which is something that happens. So this happens because of a very interesting concept that Swamiji again talks about. He says that when you have these positive thoughts, there is a lot of positive energy that gets unleashed within you. A thought creates a lot of energy. I mean, if all of us can, combinedly come up with a huge thought process, then this thought process will lead to an enormous amount of energy that we will have. But what happens is that this particular energy, instead of being channelized into the right direction, okay, gets dissipated. It is like building a huge dam across a river. Now, that's a good thing to build a good dam. It's a good thing to build a dam across the river. But if the downstream canals are not built, then that dam is pretty much useless because it will not do what it is supposed to do in the downstream. If those canals are not properly done, then that dam is actually going to create trouble. Like we saw this a year ago in Kerala when we had those unfortunate floods that happened. Because the canals that are there in our life are not very clear. They're not very clogged. They're all clogged up. They're all blocked there, and that is how the water spills out and comes out because we don't have those canals. So whenever you have energy, think about it like this, that you are a vast reservoir. You've got a huge dam of energy waiting to come forward. But then you need to channelize that energy in the right direction. If that energy does not get channelized in the right direction, if the canals of your mind are not very properly laid down, then that energy can get completely dissipated. And that is why instead of going from point A to point B, you end up at point C. Not that point C may be bad, point C may be desirable. But originally you wanted to go to point B, but now you ended up at point C. So what are the kind of stuff that actually will figure out, how do you figure out why do you want to get those canals laid out properly? So these mind canals are what we call comfort zones. The canals of our mind to direct the energy the way we want it to go to is nothing but our comfort zones. It is the past experiences that we have that will create those canals by which, though temporarily, that's why people ask me, saying, after listening to your lecture, I'm completely motivated. I want to do something in life. But then once I get back, suddenly something or the other keeps happening and I'm not able to do what I'm supposed to do. I finished my prayer in the morning. I read my Bhagavad Gita. I read my prayer. I read my book. And I'm all, gung-ho about it and I want to do something about it. But unfortunately, I'm not able to act on what I know. Now, this is the problem. Your comfort zone are really the canals of your mind which are already existing. Either you have to unclog them, and today we will go into figuring out how can you unclog the canals of your mind and try and figure out how can you actually direct that energy in a direction that is desirable, that way you want it to go. So what is this kind of comfort zone that we're talking about? So there are, I believe, three kinds of comfort zones that are causing those canals in the mind, which make sure that the energy that is generated gets completely dissipated. The first one is past experiences. So when you're doing some kind of an action, you've got all the energy, you want to do this particular action, you want to go and call on that client, you want to go and call on that customer, you want to do that particular job, you want to accomplish that particular task, you want to work on that presentation, you want to do whatever it is that you want to do in terms of an action. Okay? And you're going to get there, and there are these past experiences that you have that cause this feeling of helplessness and regret. And when you're hit with that, if this energy goes and hits that particular canal and that obstruction in that canal of a past experience of regret, saying, but I did this yesterday and I didn't get the result that I wanted. Why would, I don't know if I'm going to get the same kind of result even today. Now, that's a past experience of regret. The second kind of a clogging of the canal that happens, the canal of the mind, is anxiety about the future. The fact that you become too anxious, you've got too many expectations that, once I do this, I'm going to get this result and I'm going to finish that and I'm going to get this customer and I'm going to get this one. All that anxiety of the future will again create an obstacle in the canal of your mind. And obviously, that energy again gets dissipated and doesn't find the right outlet. Or the third one, there is too much of a frenzied activity that happens at this point of time. You get lost in that activity. There is too much of energy in you and you're jumping around, you're really, really working a lot, but there is absolutely no concentration. There is no dedicated effort. And again, the energy gets dissipated. So there are these three serious issues that make sure that all the positive energy that you have got from your positive thoughts get completely dissipated. This is very much like what Krishna talks about in chapter 3 in verse number 38, when he says, it is like smoke that envelops a fire. He talks about how wisdom gets hidden by these kinds of thoughts, by past regrets, by anxiety about the future, or too much of frenzied action at this point of time. And he says how these thoughts, like smoke which envelops a fire, can actually prevent you from going ahead. So at this point of time, you may like to ask yourself a simple question. When you get, instead of getting from point A to point B, you actually get to point C, then try and do a simple audit. How is it that my efforts are getting wasted? Why is my time getting wasted right now? Try and sit back on a daily basis and do an interesting audit, which I call a time-wasting audit. If you can actually do a time-wasting audit and figure out, how is it that my time is getting wasted on a daily basis? Is it because of past thoughts? Is it because of anxiety of the future? Is it because of too much of frenzied action? Am I not getting to where I want to get to? So try and do this particular audit and figure out how you can actually move forward. So when your mind is completely unsteady, okay, and it is getting blocked, the canals of your mind, as I said, are getting blocked by all these obstacles that are coming in your way, everybody turns around and says, where is the chance of focused action? How can I even take how can I even attempt to take focused action? It is not possible. Should I figure out a way that this is not going to work for me? And this is when the immortal teaching of Krishna comes into play, when in chapter 2, in version 47, and I hope I get this right, he talks about karmanyavadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phala hetur bhurma te sangyo sattva karmani. Meaning, you have the authority over the actions that you perform, but not over the fruits. Never let your motive be for the fruits of your action. So look at this whole thing. Negative thoughts about the past, anxiety about the future, or even being too much of frenzied action. All of this is because somewhere our mind is only thinking about the fruits that will accrue to us at the end of this entire action. And it is that which then leads us to the kind of obstacles that you want. Now, unfortunately, this particular verse is very often quoted, but sometimes I've read some interpretations which say that, thanks to this, you should actually not have any goals. And a lot of questions yesterday were asked saying, should you have goals? Should you not have any goals? No, actually, so should you abandon all action? Okay. Is it therefore saying that, look, this is going to happen to me. I am not going to get what I want to get in my life because of these mind blocks that I have. I can't do anything about it. Should I forget everything? Because, I don't want any fruits. There's Krishna is telling me, don't get attached to the fruits of your action. I have these mind blocks. So this is a very powerful combination. And therefore, should I abandon all action and leave everything aside? And Krishna says, no, you can't get out of action. Okay? Because the mind will wander and your energy get dissipated. Krishna says, no. Because he says very simply, he says, Niyatam Kuru Karma. He tells Arjuna, perform the activities of your discipline, Arjuna, because it is better than not working. Without working, this is in chapter 3 in verse 8, when he says, look, it is better to work, because if you don't work, you cannot even sustain your own body. And then he goes on to come up with another very, very interesting thing. He says in chapter 3, in verses 22, 23, 24, he makes a very interesting point. He says, look at me. I'm Krishna, I'm Narayana. I don't have any obligation to perform any particular duty. I don't need to do anything. I've got what I want to get in my life. I don't need to perform any duty in this world. Okay? Because I am beyond the gunas. I am beyond everything. And even if even then, I still perform actions. And then he goes on to make a very interesting point related to what we talked about yesterday about moving up the accountability ladder. He says, if I do not perform actions, then all men will follow my example. And then there will be a complete confusion and peace of mind will get destroyed. So he says, I don't need to perform action at all. I am beyond action. I am beyond result. I am the action. I am the result. But yet I am performing actions. And why am I performing actions? Because if I don't, men who believe that I am the ideal will ensure that they will stop performing actions. And then can you imagine the kind of confusion and the fact that peace of mind is going to get completely destroyed. So he says, you must perform actions because it is our dharma. So don't be worried about the fact that you are not getting the kind of result or the outcome that you want. And figure out a way of finding out how can we do it. And then he says, if we need to perform action, we need to perform it with the highest of faith. We must perform it free from any envy. And then we must follow Krishna's teachings in what we want to do. Align the action, as we've been talking from day one, to the higher purpose of our life. Because only and only when you align the action to the higher purpose of your life, will you start getting the kind of outcomes and thereafter the results that you want. We made a fine distinction between outcome and result. Outcome is in the now, result is in the future. Keep that in mind. From today's perspective, we need to figure this out, that today is about outcomes, tomorrow is about future. Don't worry about the future. Focus on the outcome that you want from this action at this point of time. And Krishna says something very interesting. He says, Arjuna, I do not, actions don't bind me because I don't desire the fruits of the action. And therefore he says, listen, Arjuna, you need to perform the actions. Like all of us are enjoined to perform the actions. And then spend some time on how, we will spend some time tomorrow on how these desires actually detract from the kind of action that you want. So moving on, Krishna actually reveals to Arjuna something more interesting. And I think from our current time that we are in right now with this entire COVID-19 and the kind of situation that we are in, he talks about one of the most relevant aspects, according to me, and we will spend a little bit of time on this today, and then we can open it up to any kind of an interaction. This is chapter 4, when he, verse 16, 17, and 18. And he talks about some very interesting things. He says, what is action? what is inaction, what is inefficient action. And of course, from a philosophical perspective, he goes into action in inaction and inaction in action. And he tries to get this entire dialogue. He tries to get this entire discourse into the different kinds of action that he tells people to do. This entire issue of karma yoga is actually from that aspect. That is, how is it that we can bring in a certain kind of an action into our life, and what is the kind of action that we need to take? From our modern standpoint, there are 4 kinds of action that we need to be aware of. Okay, from the modern standpoint, I'll list it out and then we'll get into an inquiry on each of them. The first is inaction. Okay, not doing anything at all. Just not doing anything about any of the issues that you want to do, not doing anything about what you need to do, what is your dharma, what do you want to achieve in life. That is inaction. Okay, of just waiting for things to happen. Okay, that is one aspect. The second is what I call as reaction. Okay, reaction is simple. Somebody is asking you to do something, and then you go ahead and do that particular thing. Just because somebody has told you that you must do it, you go and do that. That is the reaction. The third is what I call inefficient action. Inefficient action is when you are going through the motions of doing something, ostensibly because you want to do it, but there is no focus at all on outcomes. You're not going to get any outcome out of that inefficient action. And the highest is significant action. Significant action is when you take that conscious step to move up. When you move up the accountability ladder that we talked about yesterday, significant action is to be in the now, is to be focused on the complete outcome that you want to actually look at. Let me give you a couple of examples from what happens in our daily life. Supposing for yesterday we talked about the salesperson who's going around and doing stuff. You can take any example. It can be a housekeeping person, it can be a sales guy, it can be somebody in the restaurant business, it can be any kind of work that we are doing right now. If you were to look at these 4 and look at the kind of people that you have and try and find out what is the kind of trap that they've got into. Is it the trap of inaction, where they're not doing anything at all? Okay. Is it reaction, which means you're constantly prodding and pushing people into doing what you think they should be doing? Is that a kind of a thing that your people have got into, or you yourself have got into? Or are you doing inefficient action, that you're going through the motions, as we said, but you're not getting the kind of result that you want? Or significant action. Of course, Krishna talks about the 5th one, which is very idealistic, which is how can you take significant action without any attachment to the fruit of your action? And that is when he talks about in chapter 4, in verse 20, he says, abandoning all attachment to the results of his actions, even when engaged in action, being satisfied, being independent, being happy. That is the time when you can get into a place where you can take significant action without any attachment to the fruit or the result of your action. So try and see at any point of time during the day, what is the kind of area that you are in. Can we make significant action a part of our life? And this is the challenge that we've been grappling for the last 15, 20 years, saying, how do you make sure that on a daily basis, can you make significant action a part of your life? Is it possible for you to look at it every day? That can I do something by which significant action is part of my daily armory? Remember one very important thing. Whether you like it or not, each one of us, as business people, as professionals or whatever, almost 60% to 70% of our time will be spent on reaction. That is the way of the world, because we are living in a very interconnected world right now. So we are all the time dependent on somebody delivering something to us, which we take as an input, we process something from that, and we deliver an output. So somebody doesn't do it on time, somebody doesn't do it inefficiently, somebody does it with a little efficiency, whatever it is. And therefore, we will have this situation that 60 to 70% of your time will be spent on reaction. There's nothing that we can do about it. Maybe another 20% of your time will go away in either inaction or inefficient action. That is again bound to happen. And only 10% of your time will be spent on significant action. The challenge for all of us is, if we need to come out of the comfort zone of the mind, if we need to come out of these comfort zones that the mind has pushed us into, then we need to figure out a way of how can we take significant action on our purpose, on the goals, on the objectives that we have, and work on that in such a way that we can overcome all those three obstacles: regrets of the past, anxiety about the future, or frenzied activity. If you can do this through a process called significant action, then you've got a way of coming out of your comfort zone and then moving and achieving what you want to achieve in your life. So I'd like you to do a to-do list, do a task list. Those of you who are, employed or business people or whatever, take a to-do list that you've got, right? Write down your to-do list saying, these are all the things that I need to finish today as of now. And find out in that to-do list, how many of those activities are actually significant action? And how many of them are not significant action? How many of them are reaction? Or how many of them are inefficient action? And then try and on a daily basis figure out a way of bringing significant action into what you're doing. So how do you recognize significant action? Significant action, as I said, is very simple. Is action that is going to help you advance towards your purpose in life. Whatever it is that is your purpose in life, you need to figure out, how can I move to that? That is significant action. But one caution that I'd like to share with all of you. From our experience, we've seen again that this beautiful mind that we have keeps playing tricks with us. And one of the tricks that the mind plays with us is this, that it gets you to think that you're doing significant action. And in any significant action that you take, if significant action is a large square, then there is one part of that square which is inefficient action. And therefore, you could be thinking that you're doing significant action, but you could actually be caught there doing inefficient action. And therefore, keep in mind that you need to constantly keep asking yourself this simple question, that what I am doing at this point of time, is it action which is significant, or am I getting caught in the trap of reaction, or worse, inefficient action? So keep this in mind. So do a to-do list for yourself. Find out what is it that you want to do today, what is it that you'd like to achieve at this point of time, and then find out from that, saying, if these are the kind of activities that I'd like to do at this point of time, and when I'm doing that, these are the activities of mine, these are the actions of mine which are significant action. And be watchful, ever so watchful, that you don't get sucked into inefficient action, which is again a comfort zone. So here is what I'd like to recommend to all of you, that look at significant action and try and figure out a way by which don't get sucked into your comfort zone, come out of your comfort zone, because you're absolutely divine. You're somebody who's amazing. So to end, let's look at chapter 18, when verse 26, when Krishna actually tells that the doer of action, who is free from achievement, he talks about mukta sango anahamvadi, and he says the doer of action who is free from achievement, free from attachment, without any ego, has consistent enthusiasm. He remains unaffected by success or failure. That is the person who's a worker in the mode of goodness. And that is the ideal that each of us has to go. So we discovered our purpose in the first session. We talked about how we can move up the accountability ladder yesterday. And now we're moving the whole dialogue further and saying, start taking significant action if you want to move up the accountability ladder. Come out of your comfort zone of your mind. Don't let those comfort zones hold you back. You need to break free of those comfort zones. And every one of us have got so many comfort zones. I can't get up in the morning. Just a little while earlier, Prashantji was saying, I can't get up at 7 o'clock and come for this session. Why? That's a comfort zone. I can't go on a diet. That's a comfort zone. I can't do this. It's a comfort zone. So everything which is I can't or I won't, like we examined yesterday or day before yesterday, is a comfort zone. We need to break free of that comfort zone. Those are issues that Krishna keeps telling Arjuna throughout the Bhagavad Gita, saying, Arjuna, come out of these comfort zones of your mind. Don't get into this past. Don't get anxious about the future. Don't get into frenzied activity at this point of time. Come out, take that significant action, and then work on the purpose that all of us are supposed to work on.